Welcome to the Biz Gone Social podcast. We help entrepreneurs navigate how to get known, get customers, and get the edge over their competition. Here is your host, Lorraine Duncan.
So here we are on the Biz Gone Social podcast, and I am so glad to be here. And my promise to you, as always, is I want to give you a little bit of verbal caffeine that's going to energize your business and your social media marketing. Because after all, don't you want to be the business that everyone's talking about? I know I do. And welcome, Tyler Foley.
Oh, thank you for having me, Lorraine. I'm looking forward to this. This is circled on the calendar, so I'm excited.
Awesome. So why don't you tell my audience a little bit about what you do and who you serve?
Sure. So my name is Tyler Foley, as you had mentioned. I am an author, former child actor, public speaker. I also do safety consulting as a side gig now. It used to be my full-time job, but then the speaking took over. And over the last few years, I have been training people how to public speak based on the 40 years experience that I have in film and television and stage.
That's awesome. You know, you're right in my wheelhouse. I'm a speaker. I am an author. I used to be a performer years ago. I used to be a wedding singer and sing in a folk group. So I'm in the space, but not as much as I would love to be now, but I'm still there. And so a lot of people who have businesses, they're told, well, you want to get clients, speak. Mm-hmm. So what is one piece of advice that you would give to someone who wants to start a speaking career?
To recognize all the places that you're already doing it. I think so many people think that public speaking means being on stage in front of 6,000 people, and that's simply not the case. More specifically, that isn't the only venue in which you can do it. Anytime you're in a boardroom, anytime you're at a networking event, anytime you're meeting with clients, anytime you're giving any form of presentation, even if it's just selling yourself as an introduction, you are always public speaking. So I think most people feel that there's all these barriers to entry, and yet most of us have been public speaking all of our lives. So recognizing where you're already doing it is that first step to taking it to the next level by recognizing what level you're at.
That's so true. And a lot of people don't even realize what you just said. They just don't. You know, I go to about 3 or 4 networking events a week, sometimes, not every week, but most times I'm definitely every Friday. And I realize that I'm always giving either a 5-minute presentation, a 30-second commercial, a 10-minute presentation. And, you know, I remember the very first one I gave years ago at my, and I used to sing. And it's funny, even though I do this all the time, I still get the butterflies a little bit. And so some people may call that, it's a little different than stage fright, but it definitely happens. Is there anything while doing these events and stuff that you could suggest that would help beat those butterflies or the little bit of the stage fright?
Absolutely. And to be fair, stage fright is a real thing. But what most people equate it to is this fear of public speaking, which is actually not real. If we actually were afraid of public speaking, commerce as we know it would completely and totally collapse. I point this out all the time in all of my seminars. If you have ever been to a restaurant and ordered food, you are not afraid of public speaking because you spoke in public. If you didn't know your wait staff, you spoke to a complete stranger and you asked for what you wanted and got it. So this notion that we're afraid to speak in public, or we're afraid to speak to strangers, or we're afraid to ask for what we want is null and void if you've ever been to a restaurant and had food delivered to your table. The reality is what we're afraid of is public judgment. And so recognizing that is where the fear is coming from, which is then creating the stage fright or the butterflies or whatever, then the antidote to that is recognizing where that fear is coming from. And that fear being public judgment, what we need to do to get over it is recognize that the public isn't judging us, right? Anytime I've gone to any presentation, we'll take this, for example, Lorraine, nobody tuned in to the Biz Gone Social podcast and thought to themselves, man, I hope Lorraine sucks today. And I hope this Tyler guy bombs viciously. I hope he has nothing new to contribute. I hope he has nothing good to say. And I hope this is boring as all get out. I hope he forgets all of his words. Like all of those negative self-talk that we tell ourselves prior to speaking is usually what's contributing and feeding that stage fright. And the reality is the audience is on your side, right? Nobody tuned in here hoping this was going to be awful. They tuned in hoping they would be entertained or educated or both. They came here because they know that you are a valued source of information and they're getting value out of coming to your show. And that goes for any presentation anywhere. People want you to succeed. The audience is on your side. So there's no reason to fear them or fear their judgment. And if you have the opportunity to speak, you are the authority. Even if it's only the 30-second commercial as an introduction in a networking event. Hi, my name is, I do such and such. This is who I serve. All of those things you are the expert for you. Nobody knows your story better than you. So for all of these reasons, there's really no need to fear that judgment of your audience. You just have to show up and serve. And that's actually my other tip. The best thing to do when we are experiencing stage fright, it's very egocentric. We are concentrating on ourselves and it's me, 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 me. If you concentrate on your audience, it's very hard to concentrate on you and very easy to then overcome those nerves because you've stopped focusing on you and how you are. You start focusing on your audience and how they are. And in that service mentality, you will instantly melt away and dissolve all fear. It's amazing how it happens.
Yeah, I remember my very first speaking engagement. I berated myself afterwards because I forgot something. And it was funny because guess what? I was the only one that knew I didn't say that. Oh. And it was totally a waste of time.
Yeah. And it's always good to make a note. Hey, it would have been good to include this. But some of the best presentations I've ever seen have gone completely off of the script of what was planned, because those are the ones that are truly in tune with the audience and being in service of the audience. If the audience wants the journey to go this way, you can't lock them down. You can't be like, no, we're taking the Oregon Pass, or you end up as the Donner Party. That's never good. If they need to detour and you need to go somewhere else, then you detour with that audience. You take them on that journey. As long as you get them to the end destination, if you didn't get to stop at some of those little touristy points that you wanted to, those little points of interest along the way, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And you can hold it in your back pocket. This would have been good to do. Maybe next presentation, we work it in. There's always a next presentation.
I think that's important. What you said there is really important because it's also really important to know your audience. So I've walked into situations where I didn't know the audience at all. And so I asked some questions. It's easier to do this on Zoom. And I remember one time I asked a question and nobody was interested. Basically, they were not there for the topic that I had planned. And yep. I totally had to go off cuff, which was fine. You have a couple PowerPoint slides and, with a few words written on them, and you can just go in whatever direction you want to go. So it makes it very easy to do that. You mentioned something very interesting. You mentioned, and I wrote it down because no one knows your story better than you. And I think that is key. And stories sell, stories help people relate. I love listening to storytellers. What do you believe? Why is the power of the story so important when you're speaking?
Well, because it's how we find connection. As you pointed out, stats tell, but stories sell. And we are always selling something. We may not be selling a physical product, but we're selling an idea. We're selling ourselves. We are selling a concept. And the way that, like they say, never judge a person until you've walked a mile in their shoes. Well, I can't physically walk in your shoes right now, Lorraine. We're geographically separated, and my feet and your feet may not be the same size. Although I do walk in heels really, really nicely. I'm well trained. I'm good. But if you were to tell me your story, that is how I can see the world through your eyes. And that's how I can metaphorically walk that mile in your shoes. And then I can have some understanding. I can have some empathy. I can have some sympathy for what it is that you do, how you've come to be here. And I think that's the reason why stories are so important, because they provide context to what we're doing and why we're saying what we are. And that is the key. Context is the key to understanding. And once you have understanding, then you can guide people and you can have those aha moments. Stories are critical.
Yeah. And, I think about all those times that, like, even commercials, some of the stories and commercials that really got me. The biggest one I always mention on my podcast is that Subaru commercial, the one where there was that big accident. They never once mentioned, it was a car commercial, but never mentioned their name to the end. Didn't talk about the engines. They didn't talk about anything else, power steering or air conditioning. They talked about family matters. We care about your family and keeping them safe. And I remember the first time I saw that commercial, it brought tears to my eyes. It was important. And I think it's important as a speaker that we're resonating with our audience. Question: what, I've been in audiences that I knew that I shouldn't even been there. Okay. And I found out really quick. I was doing a favor for a friend. It was retired engineers, and they wanted to learn about Facebook. And I knew in my heart of hearts that I wasn't going to get a client from that. What do you do though when, that's almost a different subject, but what do you do when you feel like your audience isn't engaged in what you're talking about? They have that deer in the headlight stare. What do you do to re-engage them?
Well, there's a couple of things that can be done with that. The first one is, it's always best to acknowledge the elephant in the room. There's nothing wrong with being like, I've lost you, haven't I? Like, we're not on the same page. I am looking at a sea of glassy eyes right now. So what can we do to make that? And that's usually a good question. What can I do to bring us back? What do you need? Because first of all, it forces them to acknowledge their part in that. You may not be presenting a topic that they find interesting, but they're still there. So let's do this as a partnership. One of the other things that I have found too is if you're going into a situation like that where your topic is off, before I even begin, and this is a technique that I learned, I believe, from watching Tony Robbins. He's done this a few times. I know the late, great Bernie Dorman did it really, really well too. They posed, one of those coaching questions. If you could get one thing out of this seminar, what would it be? And that guides the audience. So they all of a sudden are saying, this is what I need. This is the information that I am looking for. This is if I could have one bit of information, if you could help me walk away with this, then you throw it up on to, whether that's a dry erase board or just have everybody write it down. You write it down, or you put it up on a flip chart or somewhere. You make note of those tidbits. And then that becomes the social contract between you and your audience. So if you're going into a thing where your presentation is not going to land, addressing it up front so that you don't even get into that situation, right? Prevention is always better than a cure. So that would be my first suggestion, is if you know that what you've prepared is probably not going to land, go off the cuff, because again, they don't know what you've prepared. And because I have adapted that as part of just my general presentation anyways, nobody would know that is not part of mine. So if you just kind of move that in and have that social contract up front with your audience, it also helps too, because a lot of times you want to build rapport and trust with your audience, and that's a quick way to do it. It also gives you an opportunity to not only create what the agenda is for this training session, but to come up with ground rules for how we're going to conduct ourselves. So you kind of do that social contract in both ways. If we agree to behave this way, these are the things that we will learn along the course. And I find that that's always helpful. The other thing is too, is if you're going through and you can see that you've lost an audience, the trick that I use all the time to re-engage people quickly is turn to a friend and tell them something that you've learned in the last, and pick a time period, whether it was 15 minutes, half hour, hour. What is the one takeaway that you've gotten so far? And that reinforces you as an authority because you have given them a takeaway. It also reinforces your message because you will have one person telling another person something and then another person telling that same person another thing. So you get two opportunities to reinforce what you've been teaching. And it gives you an opportunity to hear what of your messaging is actually landing. Because if you pay attention to what's going around, especially if you do a bubble up at the end, which gives you a third opportunity to reinforce your messaging, you do the bubble up at the end. So what are a couple of takeaways? Who wants to share? And then you have them talk. It'll do a couple of things. It takes the attention off of you so you can recenter, you can refocus, maybe get a glass of water, do some breathing. It gives them an opportunity to not just be in a one-way conversation. They now have to actively engage and think back to what they thought about and then share it. If you get them to stand up, it forces some movement, which is always good for breaking that monotony. And all of those things combined will reinforce you as the authority, gives them an opportunity to break whatever rut we've been in, and then gives you the chance to refocus and clarify too. Because if you do that bubble up and what they're sharing is maybe not correct, that gives you an opportunity to readdress it and maybe add some clarification. Or if what they're saying is landing and is correct, that gives you an opportunity to reinforce it and say, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Now, if we move on to this thing, it will build on that concept. And that I find works basically every time. That's awesome.
You've already given so many tips already, but what would you think is the very one tip that every speaker needs to know?
Less about you and more about your audience. So I think it was Bernie Dornum, or it might have been Les Brown, who said it was less about me, more about thee. And I've always loved that quote. I've thought about it often. The less you make it about yourself and the more you make it about your audience, again, why that social contract is really super helpful, that every presentation will be the best presentation you've ever given, because people will feel that they were the only one in the audience and you were speaking directly to them. They will feel intimately connected with you. It doesn't matter the size of the audience. I've spoken to 6,000, 9,000 people, and at the end you do the meet and greet and chat with all the VIPs and all the rest. And I'll go back and do a book signing, and everybody will be like, I loved what you said. I felt like you're talking directly to me. I felt that way. And what you're doing is paying attention to them and hearing their needs and addressing them. And when you do that, everybody thinks you're speaking directly to them. And so I think it's really important to remember, less about me, more about thee. Give to your audience, pay attention to your audience. You are not speaking to support your ego. You are speaking to support your audience and leave them better than you found them. And I think if you go into every situation, regardless of your audience size, whether it's 2 people, 20 people, or 2,000 people, if you go in and remember an audience is a sacred gift and treat them more valuable than gold or platinum, and your only job is to leave them better than you found them, if that becomes your focus every time, you will never have nerves, and you will always leave your audience feeling as though you connected with them. Because if that becomes a mission and ingrained in your soul that that's what you have to do, you will accomplish it every time.
I love that. That is definitely, write this down, everybody. Write it down. So I have to ask this, because as I was reading through, your bio and everything else that I was looking at before this podcast, I saw that you had why you never performing for an audience, why you never visualize them naked. I thought that was a very interesting title. Could you elaborate a little bit?
Absolutely. First of all, it's the worst advice ever given to any speaker ever on the planet. I do not understand where that came from, right? The picture your audience naked or picture your audience in their underwear. I feel, because I don't know who the person who originally came up with this advice was, but I think the idea is to somehow gain comfort through someone else's discomfort or absurdity of the situation, which to me, again, is counterintuitive to the actual way to overcome your nerves, which is to focus on your audience. And you want to focus on your audience in a good way. You want to, again, if your mission is to leave your audience better than you found them, you can't fail. And if you're trying to picture them naked so that you can somehow either gain power over that or feel more comfortable because of they're uncomfortable or they're the absurdity of the situation or whatever we would be doing this crazy exercise, you're not serving your audience. Further, what a ridiculous mental exercise. Like, you already have to think about what you're going to present and be very in tune with what your audience is and use all of your senses to make sure that your message is landing by visually scanning the audience and see what people's reactions are, listening to if there is good silence or bad silence, because there is a difference. And yes, you can tell it. Being able to feel with your heart if you are connecting, like when people are really in tune in a group, and there's a wonderful study called Heart Math. If anybody wants to do a deep dive into this, I do it a very poor explanation. So anybody who wants to go and research Heart Math, but the electromagnetic resonance that our heartbeat gives off, because it is electrical pulses. And anytime you have electrical pulses, you have a magnetic field. And there are studies that show that this electrical field around our bodies amplifies when you are in tune with another human being. It's a magnification effect that it happens with all harmonized resonance. And it's the same reason why you can ping a tuning fork on one side of the room, and if it's tuned to C and you have another C tuning fork, the other tuning fork will start to vibrate. As that harmonic resonance gains within a room, you can feel that energy in your heart. You know when you are connecting with people. And so this exercise of picturing somebody naked or in their underwear completely and totally takes you away from that natural connection and forces you into an unnatural state, which then disrupts your natural resonance, because you can only be in resonance when your heart and mind are aligned. And if you are trying to picture your audience naked, your heart knows that to not be true, and your mind will be fighting you too. So for 1,000 reasons, and I've only covered maybe 3 or 4 here, picturing your audience naked is the absolute worst advice ever. It's actually why my book is called The Power to Speak Naked, because I would rather give you the power to have the strength to tell your message without any clothes on than to reverse that and try to cover up yourself and expose your audience. It's unnecessary.
Yeah, it must have been old advice, because I remember somebody telling me that once, and I believe it was in college. And I'm like, I kind of looked at them, and I have a lot of humor, and I'm like thinking, I could just imagine if I was busy picturing someone naked, what I would be thinking. So it would be, I just didn't take the advice. And I think the best thing too, sometimes is just to be yourself when you're speaking, not to try to be something else or visualize something else. It's crazy.
Absolutely.
I'm going to switch gears because I do this on every show. What is the best thing that you love about being in business for yourself?
My time freedom. Just today, even, I was working later last night, but today my daughter is in theater camp, and I was able to drive her to camp, drop her off. I will be able to go take my wife lunch. I'm able to do these interviews. You and I get to have a wonderful conversation. I control my schedule. And for all the financial freedom that comes when you really get your business in tuned and going, it is secondary, if not tertiary, to the real freedom that comes with being able to control your time. And, a lot with that is, the time that I get to spend with my family, the time that I get to spend working on myself, the time that I get to do the things that I want. I mean, I played hockey yesterday because I'm Canadian and I goaltend. And so it doesn't matter, what time of year it is, whether it's, the middle of summer or the dead of winter, I am playing hockey at least 3 times a week. And the guys that I like to play with like to play at 9:00 in the morning. Well, if you're working 9 to 5, you can't do that. But I get to go and play hockey. I get my exercise in the morning, and then I get to do my work. So for all those reasons, time freedom is the biggest reason why I absolutely love being my own boss.
That's awesome. I totally agree with that. A lot of people, see the glamour in someone owning their own business. What would you say is the biggest struggle of owning a business?
For all the time freedom that you get, I just saw a stat. The average self-employed person works 60 hours a week, and only 14% take a vacation every 3 years. So until you can figure out how to not be self-employed and own a business, because there are differences, it's a dedicated work and labor of love. And I don't think a lot of people know that going in. You learn it rapidly, but until you know it going in, and I think it's really important too to recognize that there is a difference between self-employment and owning a business. And are you an owner or are you somebody working within your business? And if you don't know the difference, you need to learn that. And I think it's important to have an exit strategy. Like, how do you get out from what you're doing? And if you don't have that, you're going to be stuck in that rut for a very long while.
Absolutely. Great. Being just so real there. I heard you. It's so funny. Before I owned a business, I worked in the hospital in a job for ages. And I remember when I was getting married, we went for that premarital counseling that they do. And they literally he literally said, even if you can't afford a big vacation, take something. And I just learned the value since then. I mean, I always take 2, 3. I mean, I'm taking pretty much the month of July and August off every year. And literally, I think it's important to refresh. It's also important to take time off from work too during the week so you can refresh. I do a lot of writing and sometimes I have writer's block. So I'm sure that hockey that, like when I go to the gym or when I go for a bike ride, literally getting away and not thinking about my business and leaving it in the hands of people who can run my business. It's the best thing ever. So I know there's so many people out there waiting for this last question. Biggest piece of advice you can give someone that will serve a three purpose here. One is somebody who's just starting out, one who's been a seasoned business owner and is maybe struggling or needs some encouragement. And last is that corporate person that I am so tired of climbing the corporate ladder. I want to own my own business. So give it a try. Let's see what you come up with.
Well, the nice thing is the piece of advice I have serves all 3 of those categories. And that is that your story matters. Most people try to diminish and hide who they are and how they've come to be, or feel that because somebody else has done it bigger, better, faster, stronger, brighter, whatever, that their story is somehow more significant than your story. And I assure you, your story matters, and you have no idea who needs to hear it until you tell it. Once you start telling your story, you will find the people who you were meant to serve. And when you find those people, being in business becomes easy. Whether that is working for somebody else or working for yourself or growing an empire, once you can connect with your own story, be proud of it and unashamed of it in all of its rawness, that is when you have true power and mastery over yourself and your environment, and everything will stem from that. And I tell people, the thing you're afraid to say is very likely what your ideal audience needs to hear. And the people who say the hard things are the ones who are deemed leaders. So your story matters. Say the thing you're afraid to say. And when you do, you will find your ideal audience. And that is when you become a true leader of man.
Absolutely. That was so good. Thank you so much. Thank you for being a guest on my podcast. And I know there's probably so many people, so many business owners that have resonated with you. Is there something that you'd like to offer my audience, or how can they get in touch with you? Whatever.
Well, the best way to get in touch with me is to go to the website, which is SeanTylerFoley.com, and Sean is spelled the proper Irish way, SeanTylerFoley.com. But they'll be able to click it in the show notes, because I'm sure you'll put it in there, Lorraine. And if they're going to have to scroll to the show notes, they have to go past that little bar that has it says comments in it. And then there's a little couple of stars, usually 5. My request of your audience, Lorraine, is if they come to Biz Gone Social regularly, that they leave you a 5-star review and use that comment section to say why. It'll help us all. It'll serve you so that you know what your audience is enjoying and what they like. It'll serve me, because more 5-star reviews on yours means more people will see your show, which means more people will likely see this episode. It helps them because now you are aware of what they want, and you can bring people like that onto the show. So it serves all of us. And so if your audience is willing to give you a 5-star review, Lorraine, and a comment, like comment why. Don't just click the stars. We need comments. We need you to type some things here, people. If you're willing to do that and you come to SeanTylerFoley.com, above the fold, we have an offer to join my free private Facebook group, which is Endless Stages. And when you join Endless Stages through my website, we give you a couple of free gifts, including a free PDF download of my #1 best-selling book, The Power to Speak Naked. You'll get that as a free PDF. I also give you access to my Drop the Mic Trainer program, which is very quick, 7 5-minute training videos. So over the course of a week, during a coffee break, you can learn to be a better, more confident speaker, learn insider tips and tricks that I've learned in almost 4 decades of public speaking. And those are all of our gifts to your audience. Plus, every Tuesday at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern time, I go live in the Endless Stages Facebook group and do a live training for 20 minutes each day, each week, for whatever happens to be the hot topic within the group that week. So you're going to get free training from me. You're going to get the videos that you can consume on your own. You get a free PDF download of my book, but no 5-star review, no free gifts for you. 5-star review for Biz Gone Social, and it'd be my pleasure to offer all of that to you over at SeanTylerFoley.com.
Well, thank you. That's very generous of you. Thank you for turning it back on me a little bit. Nobody ever does that. That's kind of cool. So till next week, everyone, I hope you enjoyed the show. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Biz Gone Social podcast. Find us on Instagram at Biz Gone Social for extra tips. Check back weekly for new episodes. Until next time, stay social.